Hello, welcome to this short session on preparing for Stage 3 adjudication under the ISCAS Code. My name is Suzy Ashworth. I'm an independent adjudicator working with ISCAS, the Independent Sector Complaints Adjudication Service. And in this session, which is the fourth of four, I'm going to talk to you about the following things. What the process is when a complaint is escalated to ISCAS, what your organisation has to do, how the independent adjudicator works, heads of complaint, expert clinical advice and preparing the adjudication, and the Goodwill Payments Guide. In the last three sessions, I have talked about the general principles that apply to complaints management under the ISCAS scheme and how to conduct stages 1 and 2 of the internal complaints procedure. I'd recommend that you watch those videos before this one if you can, because some of what I talk about here builds on the principles introduced in those sessions. But this session does also function as a standalone guide to Stage 3. This session is going to provide a practical guide to what happens at Stage 3, rather than going in detail through every single provision of the code. So what I'd like to recommend that you do before we start is get your copy of the ISCAS Code 2022 and read pages 15 to 20, which contain the provisions for Stage 3 of the complaint process. I'll invite you to pause the video for a moment whilst you do that, and then I'll explain to you how it all fits together in real life. Okay, so let's start with an overview of the process at Stage 3. In brief, it works like this. The complainant contacts ISCAS to escalate their complaint. ISCAS checks that the complaint has completed the internal complaint process. It then asks the complainant to sign a Stage 3 participation agreement and asks the organisation to supply the complaint file. The file is then sent to the adjudicator, who prepares a chronology of events and will produce their understanding of the heads of complaint. Each party then has the opportunity to comment on these and to supply additional information before the adjudicator produces their decision on the basis of all the evidence supplied. The process tends to take between 3 and 6 months. In more detail, it works like this. When a complainant contacts ISCAS and states that they wish to escalate their complaint, ISCAS will take details from the complainant and will send them a copy of the ISCAS Patients Guide. ISCAS will then contact the relevant organisation by email to notify them that the complainant wishes to escalate the complaint, and will ask them to confirm that the complaint has completed Stage 2 of the internal process. The code requires that the organisation should respond within 10 working days. If the internal complaint process is complete, and sometimes it isn't, as complainants do occasionally contact ISCAS prematurely, ISCAS will ask the complainant to sign a Stage 3 participation agreement that states that they give consent to the sharing of personal information. The agreement also confirms that the complainant understands that they are giving up any goodwill payment offered during the internal complaint process. At the same time, ISCAS will ask the complainant to set out details of the complaint, the matters that remain outstanding, and what they hope to achieve from the adjudication process. This information is passed by ISCAS to the adjudicator with the file from the provider in due course. Next, ISCAS will send a copy of the participation agreement to the organisation with a request that it should send the complaint file to ISCAS within 15 working days. ISCAS will send a checklist with this letter that enables you to ensure that everything has been included in the file, and I would strongly encourage you to check that all of the relevant documents are supplied, which of course should be easy if you've carefully filed and indexed your documents during the internal complaint procedure. And just a note here on sending the file to ISCAS. The complaint file should please be collated within your organisation and then sent to ISCAS as one indexed PDF document that contains all of the correspondence and the medical records relevant to the complaint. Ideally, the complaint correspondence should be in chronological order at the start of the file, and the medical records and consultant notes should be placed behind the correspondence in their own chronological order. Regrettably, it significantly increases the burden on the ISCAS staff if documentation is sent over in a piecemeal fashion rather than as one coherent bundle. If, on the other hand, the bundle is in an organised state when it reaches the adjudicator, this can significantly reduce the amount of time that the adjudicator takes to understand the complaint and prepare it for adjudication, which therefore reduces your organisation's costs. Let's look now at the adjudication process itself. Once the file has been received, ISCAS will appoint an adjudicator to the case who will write to the complainant within 5 working days of appointment. The adjudicator will then go carefully through the documentation supplied by both parties and will draw up a chronology of events and then proceed to identify the heads of complaint that require adjudication. This can take between 2 hours and 2 days, depending on the size of the file and the complexity of the complaint, and the adjudicator tends to complete this exercise within 20 working days of receiving the file in most cases. Next, the adjudicator will write to the complainant and set out their understanding of the heads of complaint. The adjudicator will ask for more details if anything is unclear, and will set out any issues that have been raised that are beyond the scope of the complaints procedure. This could be either because they relate to matters that the complaint procedure doesn't cover, like allegations of criminal conduct or data protection concerns, or because they relate to new matters that have not been raised with the hospital or organisation during the internal complaint process. The only new matter that can be considered at stage 3 is a concern about complaint handling. This letter also explains that the complaint process does not determine matters of clinical negligence because causation and liability can only be determined by a court, and it reminds the complainant to seek legal guidance if they consider that this applies to them. The adjudicator will set out their understanding of the desired outcome and will inform the complainant that there is a discretion under the scheme to award a goodwill payment if appropriate. This letter invites comments on or approval to the heads of complaint and is sent to the organisation as well. It is expected that the organisation will reply to this letter, so please do take the time to check that all of the heads of complaint are matters that have been raised with your organisation during the complaint process, and let ISCAS know whether you're happy to proceed on the basis of the heads stated or if you object to any of them. A prompt response from the organisation at this stage is really helpful for the adjudicator and can speed up the process of adjudication. If you have any concerns about the heads of complaint, the adjudicator will consider these in the decision. There are a couple of other things that may happen at this stage. The adjudicator may have identified that independent clinical advice is required. If this is the case, the heads of complaint letter will make this clear so that both parties know what to expect. Also, the adjudicator may have identified gaps in the correspondence or records provided and may ask ISCAS to pass on a request to the organisation to supply whatever is missing. The code sets an expectation that requests for further information should receive a full response within 10 working days. It obviously makes for a more efficient process if all relevant documentation is supplied at the outset, but if not, the adjudicators do really appreciate it if their requests can be dealt with promptly. A note here about independent clinical advice at stage 3. Adjudicators prefer not to have to take independent clinical advice on matters relevant to their adjudication, mainly because of the delays involved in doing so, and also because we are aware that it significantly increases the costs payable by the provider. However, if it appears to the adjudicator that fairness requires that an expert should be instructed to feed into the adjudication, then this is what we will do. Usually, if truly independent clinical advice has been obtained during the course of the internal complaint process, and this has been done in agreement with the complainant and on appropriate and relevant matters, there will be no need for the adjudicator to commission further advice at stage 3. The process for obtaining clinical advice is that the adjudicator will ask ISCAS to appoint a suitable expert who is independent from the organisation involved in the complaint and from the personnel connected with it. Then, once the heads of complaint have been agreed, the adjudicator will draft instructions to the expert, including specific questions that the expert will be invited to answer. Each party is told the name of the appointed expert and given the opportunity to comment on the instructions before they are sent to the expert, together with the relevant documentation. An expert report is usually delivered to ISCAS within 4 to 6 weeks, and the adjudication will not be prepared until after the adjudicator has received and considered the expert's advice. A copy of the expert's report is supplied with the decision. The adjudication itself takes the form of a letter to the complainant which sets out the background to the complaint, the adjudicator's decision upon each head of complaint, i.e. whether it's upheld, not upheld or partially upheld, and any remedy that the adjudicator awards. The background section of the adjudication summarises the information that the adjudicator has considered in coming to their decision, and the decision section will reference this information in showing the reasoning behind the decision. The letter explains that the decision of the adjudicator is final and that, if relevant, there can be no negotiation on the level of any goodwill payment awarded. The adjudication letter is copied to the organisation together with a separate letter that summarises the decisions made, sets out any goodwill award that needs to be paid or any recommendations made for an apology, and flags up any learning points for the organisation or hospital that arise. And these could come from the circumstances of the complaint, documentation supplied, or from the adjudicator's observations on the way in which the complaint process was conducted. I would encourage you, when you receive the adjudicator's decision, to read the adjudication letter in its entirety with an ambition to pick up nuances and learning points for the organisation's performance that may not have been obvious at an earlier stage in the process and which go beyond those set out by the adjudicator in their letter to you. The final thing that I would encourage you to do is to share the action points from the complaint so that lessons are in fact learned from the experience. And that means you're less likely to have to go through a stage 3 process again. The covering letter that is addressed to the organisation is sent to the CQC or to the equivalent body in the devolved nations and forms part of the information held about the organisation concerned. ISCAS does not send the full adjudication to the CQC, although it is worth noting that there is nothing to stop the complainant from doing this or to stop the CQC from requesting it. Finally, I just want to explain how adjudicators come to a decision on the level of goodwill payment to award to a complainant in a relevant case. I hope that you will be familiar with the ISCAS Goodwill Payments Guide 2022, which accompanies the code and does set out the principles upon which we work when considering a financial remedy for a complaint. It's quite a clear and simple document, and I'd encourage you to have a look at it so that you can better understand the levels of payment awarded by adjudicators and possibly also use it in the earlier stages of your organisation's complaint handling if you find it useful. I want to bring to your attention that the primary purpose of a goodwill award is to reflect distress or inconvenience that arises from the matters of complaint upheld or because of the need to pursue the complaint. It is not compensation and it is not a refund. Adjudicators do not always award a goodwill payment, even when a complaint has been upheld. We have a discretion, but not an obligation to do so. That said, it is usual to make a goodwill award if the circumstances of the heads of complaint upheld have impacted on the complainant in some way. It is worth saying that the Goodwill Payments Guide is not an exact science, and the adjudicators will use it together with their discretion and experience to come to an appropriate award. The adjudicators do not give regard to any goodwill payment that has been offered at a previous stage in the complaint process, which the complainant is advised that they reject if they start the stage 3 process, and there can be no negotiation on the level of the award. There is no appeal against the adjudicator's decision. And that's it. That's the stage 3 process, and it completes the complaint procedure under the ISCAS Code. I hope that you have found this session and the others to be useful. Thank you for watching and listening, and good luck with your complaint handling.